Hulk Hogan's final resting place revealed. Leaked footage goes viral. Wrestling icon Hulk Hogan has been laid to rest in an emotional, private funeral service held in Florida. The ceremony was attended by his closest family, longtime friends, and select wrestling peers. As fans around the globe mourn the passing of the wrestling legend, this video takes you inside the emotional farewell to the man behind Hulkamania, Terry Bollea. From touching tributes by his children to heartfelt memories shared by wrestling veterans, this private service honored Hogan not just as an entertainer, but as a father, a friend, and a fighter. The Florida sun was unusually gentle that morning, as if the universe itself understood the weight of what was about to unfold. Palm trees stood solemn, swaying in silence, and a soft breeze whispered through the coastal town where the man known to millions as Hulk Hogan, Terry Bollea, was laid to eternal rest. It wasn't a public spectacle. It wasn't meant to be. This wasn't about the bright lights, the roaring arenas, or the Hulkamania chants that once defined an era. This was about closure, grief, and honoring the final chapter of a man who lived louder than life, but departed in a quiet, sacred farewell. The funeral was held at an exclusive, private estate just outside Clearwater, not far from where Hogan had spent the last years of his life. Security was tight. Media helicopters circled, but were pushed back. There were no fan chants, no pyro, no spotlights. Just grief. Real, raw, unfiltered grief. A grief that draped over those in attendance like a black veil, heavy and suffocating. The sun had only just risen over the quiet skyline of Clearwater, Florida, but the atmosphere carried a weight that no morning light could lift. The usually serene coastal breeze moved through the palm trees with a somber hush, as if the wind itself knew what was happening. There was no traffic jam, no press conferences, no grand arena queues filled with chants of Hulkamania. Instead, there was a strange, still reverence cloaking the town, the kind of silence that doesn't come from the absence of noise, but from the collective heaviness of heartbreak. At the gates of an exclusive estate just miles away from Hogan's cherished beachside home, a slow procession of dark, luxury vehicles made their way past tight security. Armed guards in black suits checked names, verified credentials, and whispered into earpieces, making sure no cameras, no outsiders, and no disruptions would disturb what was never meant to be a spectacle. This was not a pay-per-view. This was not for ratings. This was the goodbye no one wanted and everyone feared. This was the final resting place of Terry Bollea, the man, the myth, the legend we all knew as Hulk Hogan. The estate was carefully chosen, not for its opulence, but for its serenity. Hidden behind tall hedges and secured walls, it overlooked a private lake, still as glass, reflecting the morning sky above. The area had been transformed into a sacred farewell ground. Dozens of white chairs formed a gentle semicircle under a canopy of trees. There were no extravagant floral arches, no towering photo banners or LED screens flashing highlight reels. Just a single framed photo on a black easel at the front, Hogan in a rare candid moment, smiling gently, without the trademark bandana or sunglasses. Just Terry, his casket, made of rich cherry wood with gold accents, rested at the front of the gathering. It wasn't draped in bright red and yellow or WWE logos. It bore instead a simple arrangement of white roses and lilies, chosen by his daughter Brooke, who had insisted on something pure, peaceful, and unlike anything the world had seen of him before. A stark contrast to the man who once ripped shirts in half and flexed under pyrotechnics. This was no longer about the hero in the ring. This was about the man behind it all. Inside the tight circle of mourners sat his family, cloaked in black, their eyes swollen with grief. Brooke sat front row, her hands trembling in her lap, a silk handkerchief clenched between her fingers. She was dressed in a sleek black dress and dark glasses, but no veil could hide the pain on her face. Beside her sat Nick, Hogan's son, equally grief-stricken, wearing a tailored black suit that looked too heavy for his frame, as if even his clothes bore the weight of his father's legacy. Beside the family were only those Hogan had personally kept close in his final years. Some were expected old wrestling friends like Ric Flair, who looked visibly shaken as he arrived in a quiet black limousine, flanked by his daughter Charlotte. Flair walked slowly to his seat, passing the casket with a soft touch of his hand, a whisper escaping his lips, "Rest easy, brother." Others came in discreet silence. Booker T, Kevin Nash, The Undertaker, and Jimmy Hart, Hogan's longtime friend and manager, whose presence was both comforting and devastating. The man who once yelled into megaphones by Hogan's side now stood mute, his eyes red, clutching an old photo in his palm of them laughing backstage decades ago, before time and tragedy aged their smiles. The ceremony began not with a booming announcement, but with a gentle strumming of an acoustic guitar. A musician, unknown to many of the fans but dear to the Bolia family, began playing a soft instrumental rendition of My Way by Frank Sinatra, a song Hogan had quietly requested before his health took its final turn. As the melody floated through the open air, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. The sound was haunting, beautiful, and crushing all at once. When the time came for tributes, Brooke stood up first. Her voice was soft, trembling, but unmistakably sincere. To the world, he was Hulk Hogan. To me, he was just Dad. He wasn't perfect, but he loved us perfectly. Her voice cracked as she looked toward the casket. He gave me strength when I didn't think I had any left. He gave the world strength too, but I think sometimes he forgot to save a little for himself. Nick followed next. His speech was shorter, more stoic, but no less powerful. My dad wasn't afraid of anything, he said. Not fame, not pain, not even death. But the one thing that shook him was the thought of leaving us behind. That's what he told me last week. He wasn't scared of dying. He was scared of us not being okay. A long pause followed. But we are, Dad. We will be. Because of you. There was no WWE official speech. No Vince McMahon. No camera crews broadcasting this to the world. What followed instead was something far more sacred, a moment of silence. A full minute, uninterrupted, as everyone stood. Heads bowed. Eyes closed. A final moment shared with the man whose voice had once echoed through arenas, now silenced forever. Ric Flair was the last to speak. The Nature Boy himself could barely get the words out. We fought together. We fought against each other. We changed this business together, he said, voice shaking. And when the lights went off, he was still my brother. Always. And now I don't know what the wrestling world looks like without him. Maybe I don't want to know. The funeral ended with a private procession to the edge of the estate's lake, where Hogan's remains were interred in a specially prepared garden crypt. As the casket was lowered, each attendee placed a single rose into the ground, a symbol of farewell, of love, of eternity. Brooke and Nick placed theirs last. Brooke knelt for a moment longer, whispering something no one could hear. Then she stood, eyes red but face composed. She walked back toward the chairs with a strength that could only be described as inherited from her father. After the final rites, guests were invited to gather for a private remembrance inside the estate. Photos lined the walls, many never before seen by the public. Hogan teaching his kids how to swim. Hogan grilling at backyard barbecues. Hogan holding a baby goat at a petting zoo, laughing hysterically. The kind of man few fans ever knew. There were no chants. No grand ovations. Just muffled sobs and embraces. Friends leaning on friends. Old rivals remembering old times. People didn't speak about title belts or WrestleMania main events. They spoke about phone calls Hogan would make at midnight just to check in. About how he visited sick kids without telling the press. About how, behind all the bravado, there was a soft, fiercely loyal heart. Even in death, Hogan refused to let the spectacle outshine the soul. The leaked footage that surfaced online hours after the ceremony showed none of the speeches. None of the grief. Just a brief clip, recorded from a distance, of Brooke and Nick embracing at the edge of the lake as the casket disappeared into the earth. There were no words, just the quiet rustling of trees and the faint sound of weeping. Fans around the world have reacted to the footage with a tidal wave of emotion. Social media flooded with tributes, fan art, and heartfelt messages. Wrestlers posted throwbacks. Fans rewatched classic matches. But what united everyone was a shared sense of loss, not just for the performer they grew up watching, but for the man they never truly knew until now, because behind the muscle, the mustache, and the mania, there was Terry. And Terry is who they laid to rest that day, not just a legend, but a father, a friend, and a fighter whose last battle was fought with quiet dignity. As the sun began its slow descent over the Florida horizon, the estate that hosted Hulk Hogan's final farewell remained bathed in golden light, casting long shadows across the garden where his remains had been laid to rest. While most guests had respectfully departed after the memorial, a few stayed behind, reluctant to leave the place where the spirit of a giant now slept. They lingered by the lake's edge, their reflections merging with the still water below, just as memories of Hulk Hogan began to merge with myth. For those who stayed behind, the silence became almost spiritual. Ric Flair was among them, sitting alone on a wooden bench carved with Hogan's name, tears silently falling as he looked out into the distance. Charlotte stood a few feet behind him, watching her father, the nature boy, look more fragile than anyone had ever seen him. For men who once towered like titans in the squared circle, grief had reduced them to something more human, more real. Nearby, Jimmy Hart stood in front of a large canvas portrait of Hogan, painted specially for the ceremony. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Hart was holding Hogan's old red and yellow bandana, the one that used to hang from his pocket during their glory days. He folded it with careful hands and tucked it into his jacket like a sacred relic. It wasn't for display. It was a part of his heart now. In a quiet corner of the estate, away from public view, a small table had been set up with Hogan's personal Bible, worn from years of travel and private reflection. It was open to a bookmarked page, 2 Timothy 4 verse 7, "I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith." Someone had placed a single yellow flower on the page. No one knew who. But it didn't matter. It belonged there. As evening descended, the estate's staff slowly began dismantling the seating. The soft clatter of folded chairs and packed floral arrangements echoed faintly, but even those mundane sounds felt reverent. Brooke and Nick returned once more to the grave, this time alone. Their eyes weren't just filled with tears. They were filled with questions. Questions they'd never be able to ask their father now. Questions only silence could answer. Brooke knelt again. Not to speak, but to simply sit in her father's presence one last time. She placed a small envelope near the fresh earth. It wasn't labeled. No one knew what was inside. A letter, maybe. Or a photograph. Or perhaps something only they could understand, a daughter's final gift to the father who once towered over her world like a superhero, yet was vulnerable enough to cry during their late-night phone calls. Nick stood quietly, looking around the property, the lake, the house, the palm trees. This was the last place his father ever wanted to leave. The last place he truly felt peace. Nick's voice, soft and low, broke the silence as he muttered, "This is home. We'll keep it that way." Then he took his sister's hand, and together they walked away, not looking back. Not because they didn't want to, but because they didn't have to. He was already with them, but not everyone respected the sacredness of that moment. Despite tight security, drone footage leaked online late that night. Grainy, black and white images captured the tail end of the funeral, the lowered casket, the final flowers, and the mourning children who never signed up for the spotlight now forced back into it. It wasn't supposed to happen. It wasn't supposed to go viral. But it did. And by morning, millions had seen it. The footage spread across every corner of the internet. YouTube thumbnails, TikTok edits, Twitter trends. Hulk Hogan's funeral leaked. The headlines blared, some with clickbait titles, others with sincere intent. And while some fans treated it with reverence, others saw it as content, as views, as an opportunity to go viral on the back of a man who could no longer defend his privacy. This is where the story took a darker turn. Brooke, devastated by the leak, released a statement through her personal account. It wasn't carefully worded by PR professionals. It wasn't filtered through a corporate lens. It was raw, direct, and painfully honest. This was supposed to be just for us. Just for Dad. And now it's everywhere. If you ever loved my father, please stop sharing it. Let us grieve in peace. The message struck like thunder. Within hours, fans began taking down reposts, urging others to respect the family's wishes. Wrestlers past and present shared the statement, amplifying Brooks' plea. Even WWE released an unexpected message. Out of respect for the Bollea family, we ask all fans and media outlets to refrain from sharing unauthorized content related to Hulk Hogan's private funeral. For a company often accused of exploiting tragedy, this was a rare act of restraint, but the footage had already done its damage, and yet, in an unexpected way, it also did something else. Something no one predicted. It reconnected the world with Terry Bollea, the man behind Hulk Hogan. In a way his fans never thought possible. In the hours that followed the leak, social media was flooded with thousands of fan memories. People shared old autographs, photos from meet and greets, stories of chance encounters. A man from Ohio posted a photo of a Polaroid taken in 1993. Hogan crouched beside his wheelchair-bound brother backstage, gently holding his hand. He didn't just take the photo. He stayed with us for 40 minutes. Told us stories. Made my brother laugh so hard he forgot he was sick. A mother shared a voicemail Hogan had left her son, who was battling leukemia. He called him out of nowhere. Said he heard through a friend. He didn't tell the press. He just did it. Stories like these flooded the timeline, painting a fuller, truer picture of the man who had spent decades behind a character. For all the controversies, the lawsuits, the headlines, there was always a heart beneath the handlebar mustache. And it beat fiercely until the very end. Wrestlers who hadn't spoken in years suddenly posted tributes. Batista wrote, "He was the reason I wanted to wrestle. The reason I believed larger-than-life heroes could be real." Stone Cold Steve Austin shared a photo of their first WrestleMania encounter and simply captioned it, "Rest easy, brother. We carried the torch because you lit it." Perhaps the most powerful tribute came from an unlikely source, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. In a video uploaded just hours after the funeral leak, The Rock, visibly emotional, shared his thoughts. There'd be no People's Champ without Hulk Hogan. Period. He made this industry global. He made us all believe. And he was there for me before the world knew my name. He believed in me when he didn't have to. And I'll never forget that. Rest in power, Hulk. The heavens just got a whole lot louder. The outpouring became so overwhelming that what began as a leaked invasion of privacy transformed into a global tribute. Fans from Brazil to Japan, from small towns in the Midwest to towering cities in Europe, held candlelight vigils. A mural was painted overnight in Venice Beach, Hogan's face, painted in black and white, with the words, "Larger than life. Loved even larger." Still, for the Bollea family, the wound remained fresh. They didn't want a trending moment. They wanted their dad back. And that was never going to happen. In the weeks following the funeral, the family largely stayed quiet. Brooke was spotted once, walking alone on the beach Hogan loved so much, a hoodie pulled over her head and a single flower in her hand. She dropped it in the ocean. Then disappeared from sight. Nick took to rebuilding. Not his image. Not a career. Just his understanding of what life would be like without the man who had always been his compass. He turned off his social media. Stopped taking calls. Focused on something Hogan once told him in passing, when it all feels too big, go smaller. Family. Food. Sunset walks. That's where you'll find peace. That's what Hogan left behind. Not just a legacy of slams, titles, and promos, but wisdom. Faith. A reminder that even the loudest men can have the quietest hearts, and perhaps that's what the world is beginning to realize now. As days turned into weeks, the whispers of Hulk Hogan's passing began to settle into the stillness of remembrance. Yet, the legacy of Terry Gene Bollea didn't fade with the headlines. If anything, it began to take root, quietly, reverently, and in places far beyond the confines of wrestling arenas. In small towns, in barbershops, in locker rooms, and around family dinner tables, stories continued to echo. Not stories of scripted feuds or five-star matches, but of the man behind the mustache. The man who once picked up the phone just to make sure someone didn't feel alone. At the very church where Hogan was baptized as a boy, St. Paul's in Tampa, candles remained lit for days. The local priest, who had known Terry Bollea for decades, held a brief community vigil the weekend after the funeral. The pews overflowed, not with celebrities or media, but with ordinary people whose lives had been touched by Hogan in extraordinary ways. Some were former gym buddies. Others, fans who met him once and never forgot it. One elderly man, a veteran, stood up during the service and said, "Hulk Hogan was the only reason I smiled in 1985 when I came home from the war. He made me feel like I had something to believe in." It became clear that Hogan hadn't just built a wrestling empire. He had built bridges between generations, between strangers, between the strong and the struggling. That was his truest gift. In Clearwater, local officials proposed renaming a stretch of beachfront road in Hogan's honor. Terry Bollea Way, they suggested. A simple name for a man whose life was anything but simple. The motion passed unanimously. City Hall said it wasn't just about honoring a wrestling icon, it was about honoring a man who never forgot his roots, who never turned his back on his hometown even when he was packing stadiums across the globe. But while the world mourned with murals and memorials, one place remained unchanged: Hogan's beach house. The property, tucked away behind swaying palms and white sand dunes, remained as it was the day he passed. No press dared linger. No drones buzzed overhead. It had become something of a sacred space, untouched and preserved. Inside, his favorite chair by the window still sat facing the ocean. His guitars, now silent, leaned against the living room wall. On the kitchen counter was a handwritten note, one he had scribbled days before he died. It simply read, "Let love win." Brooke and Nick hadn't yet decided what to do with the home. Selling it felt unthinkable. Turning it into a public shrine would betray their father's final wish for privacy. So, they left it as it was for now. Occasionally, neighbors would spot Brooke sitting on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the tide roll in. She never stayed long, but she always left the porch light on. Meanwhile, the wrestling world struggled to fill the void. Monday Night Raw aired a special tribute episode, with the opening video fading from color to black and white, showing a young Hogan walking to the ring with "Real American" echoing in the background. The screen then cut to silence and a single title card, "In memory of Terry Hulk Hogan Bollea, 1953 to 2025. What followed was unlike anything WWE had done in years. There were no storylines, no promos, just real emotion. John Cena, visibly moved, took to the ring. No script, no character. Just John. He was the first man I ever looked up to in this business. He was larger than life, but always made you feel like you were the only person in the room. Cena paused, letting the silence speak. "He told me once, brother, this business will break you if you let it. So always have something to believe in outside of it." And I did. Because of him. Other superstars followed. Edge, Rey Mysterio, Randy Orton. Each had a story. Each had a moment. Not one of them mentioned championships. They talked about advice given in hallways, hugs after matches, jokes cracked on the road. Roman Reigns, stoic as ever, simply placed a pair of red and yellow gloves in the center of the ring. "This is for you, OG," he said. "Tribal chief or not, you paved the road for all of us." The episode ended not with fireworks or a cliffhanger, but with a full 10-bell salute. The crowd, silent and respectful, held up handmade signs. "Thank you, Hulk. Heroes live forever." Terry, not just Hogan. A few even wept openly. Grown men, women, children, all united in the grief of losing someone they thought would always be there, but maybe that's what made Hogan's death so deeply felt. He was always there. On our TVs. In our childhoods. In our memories of better times. And yet, in the absence of his booming voice and thunderous leg drops, what remained wasn't emptiness, it was something far more profound. A reminder of what one man can do with a platform, a voice, and a heart that refused to quit. Back in Clearwater, something extraordinary began to happen. Fans started making quiet pilgrimages. Not to the funeral estate, not to his home, but to the stretch of beach Hogan loved most. It wasn't marked. It wasn't promoted. But word spread. This was where he walked. This was where he thought. This was where he was just Terry. Some brought flowers. Others brought old action figures. One fan from Tokyo brought a faded photo of himself as a child, wearing a red Hulkamania shirt, standing in front of Tokyo Dome in 1991. He knelt in the sand, placed the photo gently by the shoreline, and whispered, "Arigato, Hogan-san." Another visitor, a retired teacher from Georgia, brought a journal. "He got me through chemo," she said, tears in her eyes. "I'd watch old matches and forget I was sick. He made me feel strong again." She wrote a letter in that journal and buried it under a small rock by the dunes. For Terry, she wrote on the front page, "Forever strong." The beach slowly transformed into an unofficial tribute site. But it wasn't chaotic. It wasn't loud. It was gentle, just like the man had wanted in his final years. Wind chimes hung from branches. Messages written on seashells lined the shore. It wasn't a shrine. It was a conversation between the living and the legacy he left behind. Backstage at WWE, the atmosphere remained changed. Younger wrestlers began telling different kinds of stories. Less about championships, more about values. Hogan said to never forget where you came from, one rookie posted. "So I called my mom today. First time in years. Thanks, Terry." Even locker room tensions seemed to fade for a while. The business, for all its intensity, remembered its soul. And that soul had a mustache and called everyone brother. In the end, it became clear that Hulk Hogan's legacy couldn't be measured by ticket sales, title belts, or TV ratings. It wasn't just what he did inside the ring that mattered, but what he inspired outside of it. Courage, resilience, loyalty, a belief that even in a world full of villains, good guys could still win. And even in death, he proved it once more, because Hogan didn't just pass away. He passed on the values that made him a household name. Passed on the dreams of a generation. Passed on the belief that even the most broken among us can still rise, flex, and shout, "What you gonna do when life runs wild on you?" He left the ring, yes. But he never left our hearts, and in every child who tapes up their fists and says their prayers. In every parent who rewatches an old match with their kid. In every fan who still believes in the power of a hero, Terry Bollea lives on. In the months that followed, the world adjusted to a strange new reality. One without the living presence of Hulk Hogan, but with his shadow cast wider than ever. Time, as it always does, marched forward. But it didn't erase him. It etched him deeper. His voice, once projected from microphones into sold-out arenas, now echoed in quieter places, in interviews revisited, in memories rekindled, in lessons passed down between generations. The WWE Network launched a dedicated tribute collection titled Remembering the Immortal. It wasn't just a montage of greatest hits. It was something more intimate. Unseen backstage footage, family interviews, journal entries from the road. It included letters Hogan had written to himself, some dated as far back as the early 80s. They were reflections, musings on life, fame, and the burden of being a symbol. In one, he wrote, "Sometimes I wonder if people love Hulk more than they'd ever love Terry. But I've learned to live with that. Because if Hulk gave them strength, that's still a kind of love. And maybe that's enough." That quote was shared across every major platform. It struck a nerve because it revealed the humanity beneath the muscle, the doubt behind the bravado, the vulnerability buried beneath decades of kayfabe. Hollywood, too, took note. Streaming platforms began scrambling for the rights to a proper biopic, one that had been shelved for years. Rumors swirled about who would play him, who would direct, who would tell the story of a man larger than life, but hunted by his own legend. The family, however, remained cautious. Brooke posted, "There will be a time to tell his story on the big screen. But not yet. Right now, we're still living it." Merchandise sales skyrocketed, not because of marketing, but because of mourning. Old Hulkamania shirts sold out overnight. Fans began wearing them not in celebration, but in remembrance. Every arena show became a sea of red and yellow once again, not choreographed nostalgia, but organic tribute. Chants of "Thank you, Hogan" erupted during matches unrelated to him. For a while, every ring felt a little more sacred. At WrestleMania the following year, the company pulled off something that left the world breathless. The stadium lights dimmed. A single spotlight hit the center of the ring, and slowly, from the rafters, descended a perfectly recreated replica of the original Hulkamania t-shirt, ripped down the middle, fluttering like a flag. On the Titantron, a never-before-seen video played. It was Hogan's voice, recorded months before his death. "If you're hearing this, then I guess I've finally taken that big leg drop into the sky, brother. But don't be sad. Be proud. Because we did it. You believed in me, and I never stopped believing in you. So keep saying your prayers. Keep taking your vitamins. And never, ever stop fighting. Because as long as you do that, I'm still with you." The stadium fell into stunned silence. Then came a roar louder than any pop in recent memory. Fireworks erupted. Fans held each other, weeping and cheering all at once. It wasn't just a tribute, it was a resurrection. Not of a man, but of a movement. The Immortal had, in a way, kept his word. He lived forever. In the months that followed, several WWE superstars launched charities in Hogan's name. One focused on children battling cancer, a cause close to his heart. Another focused on supporting retired wrestlers with no health insurance, no savings, and no spotlight. The slogan for both, "Fight Forever." The mission was simple: carry on his legacy by giving back to the very people who once believed in him. Nick and Brooke made occasional appearances, never overstepping, always respectful. They spoke less about Hulk Hogan the legend, and more about Terry Bollea the man. They talked about his love for music, how he used to sit on the porch strumming his guitar. How he cried at movies, especially ones where the underdog wins. How he never ended a phone call without saying, "I love you, brother." Even to people he'd only met once, more stories emerged. Stories the media had missed. Like the time Hogan helped pay the mortgage of a single mother he'd met at a grocery store. Or how he secretly funded wrestling schools for at-risk youth. Or how once, during a snowstorm in Connecticut, he spent 3 hours helping stranded drivers push their cars, shirtless, of course. The truth was clear now, for all the theatrics, the controversies, and the character work. Hulk Hogan had been more real than anyone imagined. He wasn't just a showman. He was a servant. A man who gave until he had nothing left to give, and even in death, he continued to give. The beach where fans had gathered in the early days became a sacred place. It now bore a discreet plaque at the dune's edge, in loving memory of Terry Bollea, the Immortal. 1953 to 2025. Let love win. The city passed an ordinance to preserve the space indefinitely. No commercial buildings. No construction. Just sand, sea, and silence. Every year, on the anniversary of his passing, fans gathered there. Some came in silence. Others came with boomboxes playing Real American. A few brought their kids, new generations who would never see Hogan live, but would grow up knowing what he stood for. In WWE's training center, his image now hung in the front hallway. Not the flexing icon of the 80s. Not the NWO rebel. But Terry, gray-haired, eyes kind, arms open. The plaque beneath it read, "The first to rise. The last to fall. A warrior of the ring, a giant of the heart." New recruits touched the photo for luck before their first match. And every single one of them knew, this wasn't just about wrestling. This was about legacy, and Terry Bollea's legacy wasn't in the ring. It was in the people who walked through that curtain believing they could change the world, because he showed them how. In the end, maybe that's the real measure of a man, not how loud he roared, but how many others found their voice because of him. Not how high he flew,